set it full. Yeah, we can't do that. No, but I'm just saying, they need to be, they need to understand the fact that that's all. Oh, yeah, you told me you like, you thought he was.
University of Virginia. Yep. I did. Okay, yeah. Well, you should. It's just the night program. Yeah, I mean, there are people that do that. I mean, straight out of school too. You probably need to take the LSAT. Yeah, well, just take the LSAT. You'll do well. Yeah.
Well, let's see what
Yes.
happens. I mean, that's good news.
You gotta keep it up.
Okay.
Say again? Yes, I am on silent mode in my phone. Thank you. Appreciate that.
The Orioles ever start playing?
Are they gonna be able to play today?
They've been postponed. See if they started again.
It's not tonight.
No, it's
No,
this
that's the
weekend.
weekend. This is the Orioles are playing.
Orioles.
The reigning AL East champions. The reigning AL East champions.
I think it's like a semi-sport.
Well, it is a semi-sport. Still fun to watch. Oh, they're warming up. Not youth. No, it's gonna be use of force, misconduct, behavioral health, First Amendment, and then supervision. We're not doing supervision, I mean, I guess we are doing supervision here, but John and Noah are here. They'll be there tomorrow. Noah at least.
Jessica, for the next one, we should coordinate.
I know we did behavioral health. Yeah, I think we're doing it again. We did you do
Let's
it?
follow up.
And for the monthly meeting? Yeah, so we always do, but not the quarterly. Yeah, so we always do, the idea is that we usually do all of the monthly meeting topics. And then they go at the quarterly, yeah.
Yeah, you grown up. How you doing? Good seeing you. Same here. My son Aiden. This is Professor Higginbotham.
Hey, Evan Shea, good to see you.
Randy DuPont.
Dr. DuPont.
Of course.
Oh, our pleasure. See if we can get some of your students to show up, we'll be in good shape. Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. Raining. We have the Orioles game too.
Is it?
No, it's raining all day though.
Okay.
Great.
So he may be, we might hire him. Good. I'm glad you're helping her, because we need, I think we need 4 more. All right. Okay. Appreciate it, brother, you know. we're not ready yet. Yeah, I know that, but you don't want to start to have somebody in here, do we? Oh, okay. Good evening. My name's Ken Thompson. I'm the lead monitor for the consent decree. I have with me my team. These are subject matter experts. Tonight, we're going to be talking about three subjects that I think you're going to find of great interest. Behavioral health, which is behavioral health crisis, misconduct and discipline, and use of force. Let me just set the stage for a second because I understand most of you are law students. And you know a little bit about the consent decree, but just let me, for those of you who may not know about it, let me give you a couple of really quick facts. Consent decree is a court order, came about as a result of an investigation that the Department of Justice did beginning back in 2015. They found, and these were the findings from the Department of Justice, that the city and Baltimore Police Department engaged in what they called a pattern and practice of unconstitutional policing. Now, this matter could have gone to court. I suspect if it had, we would still be in the middle of it, and it probably lasts another 10 years. So the parties are the city, the police department, and the Department of Justice. I think they made a wise decision. They decided, look, rather than fight this out in court, let's sit down, let's see if we can come together with a group of reforms that they think will fix this department. And that's what happened. This list of this settlement agreement, which is what it is what we now call the consent decree. And just so you know, like I said before, it is a court order. It's like anything else. When someone files a lawsuit, you either ask for damages or you ask for equitable relief. In this case, the request was for equitable relief. They wanted the Department of Justice, which is the plaintiff, they wanted a declaratory judgment that the city was in fact and BPD were engaged in unconstitutional policing. And secondly, they wanted a remedy, which would be a group of reforms that they could all agree would help this department. That's how we get to the consent decree. Now, it's a 500-plus page document, 17 areas. And tonight, we're going to talk about three of those areas, which I think are incredibly important because they present two things. At the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is to get this department to a place where the community will have some trust in them. And there are two ways, there are probably more than two ways, but two major ways that happens. One is that the police have to interact with people appropriately. And so two of the areas that we're talking about tonight, use of force and how police interact with people who have a behavioral crisis, how police deal with them goes a long way to instilling trust. The other thing that the department has to do, they have to show to the public and have to prove to the public that they can police themselves so that when a police officer makes a mistake or commits a crime or does something else heinous, that he or she is being held accountable. And so we have my subject matter expert, Mr. Hassan Aiden, who's going to talk about misconduct and discipline. So rather than me spend a lot of time talking, I want to save time for these tremendous experts. I'm going to ask, excuse me, I'm going to ask Taz Villasenor to discuss use of force.
Thank you, Ken. As Mr. Thompson said, my name is Roberto Villasenor. Everyone calls me Taz, so it's a nickname. Just a little bit of background. I spent 35 years in policing. I retired as chief of police for the city of Tucson. And when I retired in 2015, I was one of the founding partners of 21CP, and we are a lot of the subject matter experts for the monitoring team for the consent decree. Now, one of the areas that I cover is use of force. Now, if there was ever an area that is fraught with potential for either abuse, misuse, misunderstanding, perceptions of unaccountability, it's use of force. And so it's one of the areas that I think has the most significant need for monitoring and adopting and changing and establishing best practices. When we started this whole process, as some of you may be aware from the reading, we had to employ use of force that we really coined a new phrase at that point, and it was called de-escalation. It wasn't something that was widely known in policing circles. Some people did it, some officers did it just by the nature of who they were, but it wasn't formalized as far as the profession. And that was a need that really helped come about because of some of these consent decrees and collaborative reforms where agencies realize, we spend a lot of time teaching officers how to use force and how to defend themselves, how to defend others. We don't spend nearly enough time teaching them how to avoid force, how to de-escalate situations, how to use words, how to use empathy, how to use different methods to prevent them so they don't have to get to a point where they're using force, or when they do have to use force, that they can minimize it as much as possible. So that was a requirement of the consent decree. To do that, we looked at the policies that were in existence and the training that took place because of those policies. We revamped with DOJ, the monitoring team, and BPD, all of the policies that were dealing with use of force. And there was, I think, 11 or 12 of the policies dealt with them, from the general use of force policy to weapons, canines, accountability. Each individual type weapon had their own policy that dealt with it. We broke those all down, looked at it, and said, how is best practice dictating that you should reformat and rewrite these policies? And then once you write the policies, you needed to make sure that you got community input as well as line officer input. You don't want to sit there and write a policy in the comfort of a room with not anything going on and then realize once it gets out into the street, it can't be applied. Or that from a community perspective, you're doing something that really is not acceptable. So we sent it out for input from all different levels as to what the policy should be. We took that back, incorporated a lot of the suggestions. And then once that was all finalized and approved, we had to establish training for the officers to enforce those policies. That all took place in the first few years of the consent decree. And we did the training, I believe it ended in November of 2019, when the policies actually went into effect, because we had established them, had them approved through the court, and conducted all the training that went there. But we also looked at the use of force that occurred prior to that to try and get a baseline as to how BPD was conducting its use of force, and we applied it to the way the current policies were written to see how would it, hold up under the current policies. Already, BPD had implemented some of the changes that they knew were coming down the line, and so there were significant drops in the amount of use of force and how the policies were being implemented and enforced there. But once we started doing the policies live, we went back and we did a use of force assessment. This is where we pick out a statistically significant number of use of force cases across the whole gamut. And we look at them and we have subject matter experts review the body-worn camera, all the case reports, the use of force investigations that talk about, what was done, how was it done, was it right, and what accountability occurred. We then graded that on a summary tool, and we rated whether it was in compliance with policy standards or out of compliance. And we met with all the parties involved to discuss those cases to make sure everyone had a clear understanding of what was going on. We did our first semi-annual, the first full compliance report on use of force, which incorporated that first review. And while we had seen significant improvement in the areas of use of force, we still felt that there were some areas that needed to be improved upon, particularly in the areas of supervision and reporting and accountability on that. So we put that forward in our report, stating that although we'd seen significant progress, these areas needed to be worked on. If they would be worked on, then we felt that BPD was well on its way to coming into some form of compliance with that, or initial compliance. However, we also are mandated by the consent decree to go back and review on a routine basis the policies that are in place for the consent decree to see if things needed to be adjusted, needed to be changed. And that's what we did in 2023, end of 2022, 2023. And we looked at it, and there were some significant policies that changed. Probably the most significant one was the definition of a chokehold and neck hold. And so I'm sure most of you are aware, that has been a very controversial issue across the country in use of force, in that some agencies teach it as a less lethal method or a non-lethal method, yet oftentimes you've had people die who have had a chokehold or a lateral neck restraint put on them. And so we wanted to make sure that we were really capturing any of those incidents and making sure they were done appropriately. First off, the policy banned all neck hold and choke holds. So that was significant, yet we were still getting them to occur. So we looked at it, And we found that a large number of those cases that were being classified as chokeholds or neck holds really did not fit the classification of a chokehold or neck hold. And now you look at the video, and an incidental swipe, in a struggle with an individual who's resisting, and you try and grab the shoulder, and all of a sudden your arm comes across here, they were counted as a chokehold. And there's no indication that the person had a loss of air or blood or any way that it was incapacitated by that chokehold. But because the arm or hand went across the neck, they were counted as a fatal use of force, which really is not appropriate. So with DOJ and MT and the monitoring team and BPD's congruence, we reestablished the neck hold chokehold, trying to emphasize the point that in order to qualify as a neck hold or chokehold, there has to be more than a momentary or incidental touching of the neck, and it has to restrict the flow of blood or air to qualify as a chokehold. And that policy was approved on and put into effect, and that we probably are going to see reduce the number of fatal force incidents that really shouldn't qualify as that. We still want to keep an eye on it, though. You cannot let that slip. You can't let that, slide back into a way where that could be abused. But that policy was changed, and that was put on into effect. Also, we required supervisors to respond to all use of forces. Prior to this latest adjustment of policies, they only were required to respond to, we have use of force divided into a level 1, level 2, and a level 3. Level 1's the least amount of force. 2 is the middle amount of force, some less lethal weapons. Level 3 is lethal force. So we had supervisors respond whenever it's a level 2 or 3. But as we said, we felt there was a need for better supervision about use of force. So another policy we changed was to require supervisors to respond to every use of force incident that occurred. So that was a policy change that went into effect. Those policies were implemented in December of 23. And as a result, we are just now starting out on our second compliance review or use of force assessment review, which will then be put into the next compliance report, which will hopefully show what progress, if any, has been made by BPD, what areas with the changes that we made have been affected, has that been improved, and we'll go into a compliance report that will come out probably in 2025, I think.
Probably this year.
But it's a tremendous amount of work. We have to divide a large number of cases among several people to look at it, and then we all get together and talk about it to make sure we're grading it appropriately and similarly. So you don't want to have one person giving, this is okay, and on the other side, someone else saying, no, that's not. So we talk about the differences of the cases and make sure we're doing things correct. So that's where we are now with use of force, and that we're starting on the new assessment. We're going to continue with that work, and then that will be presented in the next compliance report. There's anything for questions?
We can. Any questions? Or we can wait till the end. Let's do that. Let's wait till the end. Let me turn it over now to Dr. Randy DuPont, who is our subject matter expert in the area of police interaction with people in crisis.
Thanks, Ken. Folks, I want to cover a couple things. One I want to talk about is the unique nature of the consent decree in Baltimore that's different from other parts of the country and the consent decrees they've been through, because I think it's really made an impact on what we're trying to accomplish here, involving with individuals who are experiencing a crisis related to mental illness or substance abuse. And so I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but after that I want to talk again about what the Baltimore Police Department has accomplished and what the city is taking responsibility for and is facing as their obligation under the consent decree. By the way, as a way of introduction, I'm a professor at the University of Memphis. I'm in the Department of Criminology, previously a professor at the medical school there at the University of Tennessee, where I was responsible for a psychiatric emergency room for about 15 years. And now I've been working with the criminology section of our university, as well as working with the consent decrees here. I've been fortunate enough that I've been involved in 4 or 5 consent decrees, depending on how you count them. 2 of them was a monitoring situation. One is on the Department of Justice, and one with the police department. All of those were under consent decrees. So it's been an interesting experience for me. I was fortunate enough to be in on the ground floor of development of a model that really made use of the things that you heard Taz talk about, which is the ability to use de-escalation as a primary tool of intervention. We've been very fortunate. That model has developed. We're in probably over 8,000 cities now in the United States. And it's been something that has been, has been part of consent decrees for quite a while, and that's what it is here too. But what makes this consent decree unique is that they decided they were not going to stop with the police department. What they decided to do was to say, wait a minute, the police obviously are not just responsible for what happens. There's a system out there of mental health and substance abuse care. And is it doing its part to support the police when they try to do the right thing? And I think that was a very insightful thing that they came across and thought about. And it's kind of evolved nationwide into a model what makes sense. And what they're doing now is they're saying, okay, the police have to do things that make sense in the interventions. They have to have policies that work. But then on the other hand, the city has to decide to put up some of the money that's needed to make the mental health system really work. It's not the case that we can let a mental health system or substance abuse system starve to death without having the kind of support that's needed. And one of the complaints has been that the city has not stepped up to the plate early on. When I first came here to Baltimore, that's one of the things I heard constantly was that the city wasn't playing a role. They were leaving everything up to the county or a county structure or to the state structure, but not to their own responsibility. And that's an impressive change. So the Baltimore consent decree says that the city has obligations under the consent decree that is unique to Baltimore. In other consent decrees, they don't mention the city, and we have to hope that the mental health system or the city will do the right thing. But in Baltimore, we actually have enforcement power related to the consent decree that is very unique and has some very strong implications. The police section of things is going quite well. What I'm excited about there is something that's pretty straightforward. When you really think about what's the difference to the average citizen, yes, it's nice that we've developed very impressive policies that are actually being used by other cities. It's impressive that we have done excellent training, that the department is doing a fantastic job of training people, and they're doing and getting this training to be part of an effort from the community. It's important that we have a community board that advises us. Sometimes we get 50 or more people there trying to provide the advice that's needed from the community, and I would encourage all of you all to join in that as well. And those things are indeed very important. But what we have found is that when we take a look at the body-worn camera footage of the officers, we pulled a sample. The first sample was 95. We did another sample of 95, so we have a total there, about 190 that we've looked at, including our monitor here has had to go through them as well. And we look at them and we try to ask the question, are the officers doing what we want them to do? Are we seeing the kind of things that's actually the terms that are in the consent decree, that people are treated with a great deal of dignity, and that the respect for their civil rights around their rights around mental health treatment is also being considered. And what we have found is pretty impressive. That is that we're finding consistently that the officers are not just going through a training, but they're implementing that training in the streets, that they're making a difference in the way that they interact with individuals, that I think if any of you all got to look at those videos, you would say the same thing. You'd say, well, this officer is really going out of their way to show a great deal of kindness and caring and trying to make a difference in that person's life. And that's an impressive outcome. And so when we look at their results, we're very pleased with a lot of the things that they've done. We have about 23 paragraphs that directly relate to the police department. In our examination of them, 18 of them were in a very positive state. 16 of them are in general compliance. So we're looking at some very impressive results there. What's off track, to be candid with you, it's really more of administrative and bureaucracy. That is, lack of tracking certain records so that we could even assess them properly. Lack of identifying things that they actually did when they selected their officers that are going to take the lead in this program. And we think those things are very fixable. So for the police side, we're actually quite excited and we're pleased about it. But as I started with, what about the paragraphs that involved the city? Well, the city realized that those paragraphs needed to be firmed up. And so there was a second effort to further clarify the consent decree, and they reached an agreement with DOJ that highlighted 7 major points that really have direct impact on the quality of life for the individuals in Baltimore. And they're working on those 7 things to make a big difference. I will tell you that's a challenge for the city, because it's quite an impressive list that they have. And let me just quickly identify a few of those things. One, they're saying basically we're going to rely more on community services and less on the police to intervene when it's needed. We're going to make sure that those mobile services have adequate capacity so that they're not just on paper, but they really can come to the scene and help individuals out, especially when the police call them and say, hey, I need support of the mental health system so I can go do my job fighting crime, but you can take forth and help that person get the kind of care that they want. They're saying that also peer support services have to have an impact in Baltimore. They were frankly not very strong, nor were they even in existence in some cases as part of the helping mechanism. But that's going to be a requirement under the consent decree. They have to address the needs of individuals with disabilities and their housing. It's more difficult for people with disabilities to obtain housing because of the disability. And what they're doing now is the city is obligating itself to make sure that that has an impressive impact. They're going to do a quality assurance on the whole system. That is, they're going to ask them, they're going to take a look and review key events, and they're also going to look at the way agencies relate to each other so we can answer the question of why do some people seem to be cycling through systems and never really getting the care that they need. And we're really going to see a difference, I think, in that, and I think that's very important. It's going to, they've already gone, the city did go before the legislature through their delegation here in Maryland, and they got a law passed that allows them to transcend some of the limitations that were on that previously and information to be shared among agencies so that they can try to see if quality care is really happening or if people are just passing the buck, and I think that's important. Finally, there's ongoing reviews in the gaps in the systems, and they're asking that citizen group to be advocates to step forward and advocate for the kind of funding that might be needed. And then finally, they're going to work hard to have an MOU between the funding stream that comes from the state, that goes through the behavioral health system of Baltimore, that then goes to Baltimore itself, so that those can be better integrated and work in synergy together. So I'm very excited about what's going to happen. It's challenging to see the city tackle all that because it's quite a myriad of things. I would encourage you to read the Gap Analysis Implementation Report, which unfortunately is 50 pages, but it does really try to address what their long-term game plan is and then see what difference it makes. So I'm going to stop at this point, but I do want to ask you all during question and answers to be thinking of something that would help us. We're seeing an incredible difference in the body-worn camera footage. It's really made a difference, and we're really impressed. But that word doesn't get down to the level it needs to. The individuals that are involved are still fearful and hesitant to when they relate to the police. They need to be able to understand the police are going to basically do a good job. They're not going to be responding in an impatient or inappropriate way, and that they're going to call on community resources that will make a difference. Your help in getting that word out will be needed because we're really frustrated a little bit that this word isn't making its way to the public as it needs to. I thank you for that. Ken?
So you've just heard from two experts who've talked about the interactions of police between themselves and the community. And as I said early on, and these are really, that's obviously an important piece of the puzzle. The way that the public perceives how they're going to be treated by police goes a long way to building trust. But we also have to look at the other side because you're looking at multiple thousands of people that work for the police department. It's a human system. You're going to have people make mistakes. So you're going to have an accountability system. And this is where the misconduct and discipline area comes into play. And for that, I would ask Mr. Hassan Aiden to present.
Good evening. Thank you for coming out tonight. As Ken said, my name is Hassan Aiden. Just by way of background, spent 3 decades in policing. I'm a retired chief of police in Virginia and Greenville, North Carolina. Since my retirement, I was director of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is, I mean, I was just too far from it. I'll get closer to the mic. Thank you. And after that, I started getting involved in on monitoring teams and specifically consent decree, federal consent decree monitoring teams. So I've been in a leadership role in this consent decree, Seattle, Cleveland, Chicago, and a couple other minor settlement agreements. But that's how I got into this work. I take it very seriously, and substantively, on every team, I handle the accountability, the internal affairs. My policing years, I spent 10 years in internal affairs and revamped 2 different departments' internal affairs functions. But I will go into some background as to what we found when we got here in Baltimore. When we started our work here, it was evident in the area of internal affairs and internal accountability that it was then called the OPR, the Office of Professional Responsibility, that system was 100% broken. And back then, in 2018, the court even observed and stated the system must be rebuilt from foundation up to ensure it functions as a fair, transparent, and robust arbiter of integrity. So by now you've heard two of my colleagues talk about sort of the process of monitoring. You start with a monitoring plan, you start then with policies, then you move into training, and then those policies and the training, you start to observe the implementation of those things. So we started off in the same way, but we couldn't even get to the policies. We realized that OPR needed to be 100% scrapped. None of the files that we looked at resembled there was no sort of order in the files. They were completely inconsistent. You could tell immediately, and Ken was with me when we reviewed the first 150 files, that the investigators had no training. As a matter of fact, OPR was a place that the BPD got rid of people and put them in there, in one of the most responsible places and one of the most sort of liability-filled places in any police department. So it was evident. It was a disaster. Then the gun task force, all of that emerged, and just the blatant criminality that all started with unconstitutional, illegal stops, searches, arrests. None of that went addressed. So fast forward to a couple of new commissioners. One of the commissioners changed the name and restructured it, got rid of almost everybody in there, restructured it to the Public Integrity Bureau. That Public Integrity Bureau, that's when we started to get traction. And that was probably about a year and a half in. That's when we were able to start building policies, doing training for extensive training, and starting to build that staff back up. That staff, when we started, there were 17 for almost 3,000 member police department. Granted, they were short, but its authorized strength is about 3,000. There were 17 investigators. There is no way that they could keep up. They had caseloads of 70, 80 cases. So they weren't even really looking at their cases. They were just untrained and trying to get them off their desk. So there was no accountability. PIB started recruiting capable investigators. They started changing how the police department itself viewed that assignment. People that did well in PIB were getting promoted out. They were getting promoted out, not indicted, and then spreading throughout the organization and spreading the word around accountability. Where it stands today, there are 35 investigators today. So it more than doubled, and we're trying to get to about 48. And the 48 number comes from BPD, and the reason for that is we want them to have much smaller caseloads so that they can actually thoroughly investigate them. So that's part of the background. Where we are today, let me fast forward to that. All of the policies governing oversight in the BPD, they've been rewritten, modernized, and are congruent with the requirements of the consent decree. And they also have heavy dosage of best practices in policing. I don't like to say best practices, but that's really sort of what they are. It's sort of cream of the crop from policies from departments that have shown to be extremely accountable. We've customized them to fit BPD, fit the city, and they're now in play, all of them. Most recently, though, BPD collaborated with the monitoring team and the DOJ, the U.S. Department of Justice, on some policy revisions that needed to be amended, and that's based on the police reform legislation that was passed in April 2021, specifically House Bill 670. So we had to go back and actually rebuild some policies and redraft some policies to include those changes. One of our accomplishments when we were doing policy and training was the Public Integrity Bureau, the investigator's manual. They had no playbook. So the training was heavily built on about a 100-page manual that basically from A to Z told an investigator all of the different tasks that they needed to do in an investigation. It built a structure, it built consistency, it built accountability around the investigation. So that accountability was on the investigators to do a good job and do a thorough, timely, competent investigation. But then that accountability went to the sergeants and the lieutenants and the commanders that were, in fact, reviewing and approving these investigations. So that was a huge win. And as a matter of fact, that PIB manual, I'm doing a little work on in Minneapolis. They're about to get into their consent decree. It just really is kicking off. But their internal affairs has been looking at Baltimore's PIB manual as sort of a best practice. So they're heavily using that. So we're really proud of what we were able to accomplish with BPD and with the DOJ and community. A lot of community input went into that. Training, a lot of training was done in May of 2021. And that was done 100% supervisors, commanders, investigators in PIB had to go through this training. It was a week-long. We also invited other departments that were interested in sort of latest cutting-edge training. So we had representatives from not just this part of Maryland, I think also down like Prince George's County sent some folks. It went over really well. And I think that was one of the turning points another turning point when people really started taking pride in their work. And you could see it today. And I'll get to our assessment that we just completed. You can see the difference from that May 2021 training to the way cases have been built out, to the way that this agency holds itself accountable. It's impressive. It's impressive. So the PIB structure and facility. PIB had, back when it was OPR, moved into an off-site facility. It's a standalone building on Kirk Avenue. And they built it out so that it modernized. It wasn't a closet like what they had before. They had technology. They had lighting. They had space. They had multiple screens. They had interview rooms. They weren't doing interviews out in the open. They had conference rooms. It professionalized them. Today, they house all of the investigators. They continue to modernize it. It's very welcoming to the public. So the public can, if one wants to make a complaint in person, you can walk into PIB. They'll greet you. They'll sign you in. They'll get an investigator. You go into a nice, comfortable conference room or interview room, and you file your complaint. That's not the majority of the complaints because they also have online complaint forms. They have complaint forms in all the districts. You can make a complaint here or a commendation on an officer in 500 ways. And that was very important. The reason why I'm focusing on this is because prior to the consent decree, there were lots of roadblocks. Someone would walk into a district and make a complaint, and it just fell on deaf ears. Like complaints were not being taken. So this is also an area that we're going to be auditing and looking at. But we're pretty confident that with all of the ways to make a complaint and all of the audit trails, there aren't complaints falling through the cracks. And if we find any, we'll deal with that and how that fell through. That's their facility. Staffing at this point, I covered it. They're up to 35. We want to get up to 48. BPD is extremely short. Like all police departments throughout the United States, it is really difficult. It's a difficult time to recruit. But things are getting better. And they're getting innovative in how they do recruit. But once these officers come in, once they go through the academy, through their field training, and then they go out onto the street, and when that happens is when the commissioner and his staff can start to then move experienced officers into other areas of the police department. And every single area is competing for these officers. Thankfully, PIB gets a lot of priority because the leadership here at BPD understands the critical need to staff up PIB. Lastly, I'll close out with our assessment. We just finished it in December. We reviewed hundreds of misconduct cases in the same fashion that Taz described the use of force cases that we're also reviewing now. And that report is going to get filed in court very, very soon. I expect probably within the next month. And that'll be public for people to read. And it's very telling. We've seen a lot of improvements, but we've also pointed to the areas that BPD has some road left to get into compliance. So it's going to be a great document for us, BPD, DOJ, to sort of bridge to the next assessment where we're going to point to exactly what they need to do to get into compliance, and we're going to help them get there. They're going to have to do the work. A lot of it is, like what Randy said, a lot of it is administrative tasks that sometimes fall through the cracks. But there are some there's some investigations-related matters that still do need to come into compliance. So I'll end there, and we'll answer any questions once we get to the conclusion.
Questions, and Jess, you'll handle any questions that we get on Facebook. Come on, guys. Hassan, I'm going to start. Let me ask you a question, because in the early days, not only did the police department have a shortage of investigators, and overloaded, I mean, just caseload was crazy, but steps were taken to at least try to, what I would say, clean out some of the blockages in the system. Can you talk a little bit about what happened, how it happened, and the benefits of the dealing with, in particular, the summary cases that were taken care of, like people losing a hat and not clogging up the system for 10 years?
Yes, so as you can imagine, in any police departments, there's misconduct, and then there are, I guess they can be considered misconduct, but it's, someone loses their hat, or someone is late for roll call. Someone has a single car accident as they're backing out of their parking spot in their district, and they acknowledge it. But yet, all of those cases were getting written up, and then an investigation would start at PIB. A lot of those cases are cases where the officer, he or she will readily admit to say, I lost my hat. And yes, it's against policy. I'm willing to pay for it. I'll take my lumps. But those cases took a year to get out of IA before they were adjudicated. And they just clogged the system. So Commissioner Harrison, in collaboration with us and with the DOJ, came up with a policy called expedited resolution for minor misconduct. So essentially, those cases now, they go through a different process. They're written up, they're documented, but they're resolved within 30 days. And generally, if the officer doesn't agree, then it goes into a full investigation. But most 99% of the time for those kinds of minor misconduct, the officers readily acknowledge that they did it, and it's resolved and out of the system. So there's a record of it, but it just is taken care of. There have been over 600 of those cases. So it continues. It's a great policy. It continues to declutter and make sure that the cases that they're getting are cases that need the investigation. They're priority cases. And is that
Yeah,
answer your
thank you,
question?
yes. Thank you. Yes, sir. Might be better if you stepped at the mic so people can hear you. Good evening. Hassan?
I'll take the first part. The first part, yes. There's essentially an early warning system that now prevents, and it's still somewhat in development, but I believe it's active. That's actually not in my area, but I think it's in the technology that they're using right now. And I'm not sure what the triggers are. Generally, it's 3 complaints within a 6-month period. But that flags officers and it mandates an intervention by their command. So the days of shuffling around are over. And it goes further than that, in that the state is trying to put controls in so that if an officer leaves BPD, they can't go and join Prince George's County Police Department or the county, Baltimore County. So a lot of those things are in progress or already underway. And Ken, you want to speak to that?
Well, I think you've answered most of the question. What I would add, and maybe this is not what you were getting at, but for example, because the technology has improved, I can't even figure out the right word. I mean, it's beyond dramatic. I mean, when we first came on board, and I'm no techie, but I was told that the technology here was equivalent to a 1985 platform. They were using things like Lotus Notes, and even I know that was crazy. Technology now is state of the art. I mean, they are really probably, ahead of most police departments. And because they now have the right platform, they have this early intervention system that's being built, but it's designed to identify early on an officer who may have a problem. I mean, every officer is not looking to hurt somebody, but like any human being, they get up in the morning, they have a bad day, they make a mistake, they have debts. They have things that weigh on them. They've seen something out in the field that's traumatic. I mean, what these police officers see on a daily basis, you and I would not want to see in our lifetime. And so, this system is designed to flag someone who may be having a problem so that they can get the kind of help that they may need before they do something wrong. So I think that's a very important piece. It is part of supervision, and I would tie it into accountability. So I do put that in Mr. Aiden's category, but that's something that I would think the public would like to know about.
And to answer your second part of your question about, how what's going to happen when we're gone, right, in a few years. Well, the consent decree is not going to get dissolved until the BPD has shown that they can critically self-assess themselves. So all of these systems, they're aimed at a certain point. Once the department reaches full and effective compliance, they're going to go into a sustainability phase. In some cases, it's 1 year in some areas. In other areas, it's 2 years, where we remain, but we're watching them monitor themselves, and they'll have to report to the court. And we're watching very carefully. It's not an inactive part of this monitoring process. It's actually quite active. I've gone through it in 2 cities. It's a lot of work watching the agency because you're still providing technical assistance and trying to help them get that right. Only then will the court dissolve the decree.
If I could add on to that, we have entered into one area where that is going on, and that's transport of persons.
Two areas. Yeah, no, go ahead, yeah.
And officer safety and wellness as well. And so I know that we have approved the sustainability plan of BPD, how they laid out, how they intend to self-monitor themselves. But that doesn't mean that we stop looking at it. I'm here now. In fact, earlier today, I was at BPD headquarters evaluating their audits of their transport units to make sure that they were covering everything correctly. I will continue to do that even when they take on that audit function. I guess I will be auditing the audits to make sure everything gets done right. And they have to continue that, like Hassan said, different lengths of time for different projects.
I'm really glad that Hassan and Taz talked about the sustainability period because, I look at it as a golfer, you've got something called muscle memory. When you do something over and over and over again, either the wrong way or the right way, that's the way you do it. And that's part of what this process is set up to do. We have tried to give the department the right tools through training to do things the right way. before we have reached the point where we've assessed them, we watch them do it for a while because we have to collect the data. In those two areas that they have been found in full and effective compliance, we will spend a year, as Hassan said, looking at them. And the thought is, and these are pretty good people working in this department now. It's not like it was when I grew up in this city 40, 50 years ago. I mean, these are, for the most part, really, really good, dedicated cops. You would think they would learn, and once they've learned and they do it right, and they get the right kind of accolades when they do it right, they'll continue to do it. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
I also would like to say in that final part that Ken just talked about, not everyone's cut out to carry a badge. So the systems are in place to find them and free up their futures. Badge free.
Jessica, anything, Facebook? Randy, let me ask you a question because you raised an interesting point early on about the resources available to the police when they come into contact with someone who's having a crisis or some behavioral situation. How do you see that unveiling itself in Baltimore City?
One of the things I think that was good was, I think, and the consent decree was involved in this, I think, indirectly, that the state has really stepped up to the plate and really committed major funding for mental health and substance abuse services in the Baltimore area through the mechanism that they have with what's called BHSP, which is basically a multi-county funding source that gets money from the state and other sources and provides it to services that directly affect Baltimore. So I think that that's made a difference. But the city has also decided to use some of the funding that they've gotten that came out of the pandemic response to try to bring things back to where they need to be, and they're using that funding as well. So I think the issue right now is not one of funding. To be candid, originally when I started, everybody said there's no funding, but that the state has put up something on the order of $40 million to change the way crisis services are done. And then the city has put up several million as well to then also impact on homelessness and on the issues of mental health and crisis care. So I think it's making a big difference. And I don't think the issue is funding. I think the issue right now is organizing the efforts and trying to make them all work together instead of working and squirting out in several directions. So I think that's that. And that's an encouraging part, folks, because that used to always be the complaint, where are we going to get the funding? But that's not the issue that's being brought up.
Let me follow up on that, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
I'm also interested in trying to figure out where are we going to get, when I say we, because I live in Baltimore City, where are we going to get the resources? I don't mean money, but in terms of personnel, in terms of the right kinds of social workers, the right kind of psychologists who are interested in doing this work and who can staff up what we think is going to be a pretty robust plan.
It's a pretty serious issue, Ken. In addition to police not having enough individuals that are stepping forward to be police officers, your other services, EMS services, your fire services have the same problem. And then, of course, mental health and mobile crisis teams have the exact same problem. So all four areas are struggling to find enough people to do the job. So that is a serious issue. We have included some programming to expand the range of what are called peer counselors, but also to expand the interest of individuals in providing the services for mental health. But I've got to be honest and say that I think that that's going to take a dedication that we haven't seen. I think the federal government needs to step in with some programs like they did, frankly, during the John Kennedy administration, where they really did fund a lot of training and educational costs for individuals that wanted to become and go into mental health, and it made a big difference for quite a while. But I don't see that kind of funding available now, and I'd love to see that available. I think it really is a serious shortcoming. And to be candid with you, when professions become more successful, they have a tendency to want to become in a private practice in an office building somewhere instead of really getting out there in the streets and helping. So it's important. And I'm going to add one more question now, if I could, to the audience, and that is, one of the things we're finding is that we're seeing good results in some of what's being done, but it doesn't seem to be able to work its way into the public and into the individuals who really make the difference when they have to call 911. So I'd be interested in any suggestions or thoughts y'all might have on that. Would be how can BPD get that information out in a way that people find it credible and then respond in the way that they need to, which is be able to, in the case of mental health, reach out to either 988 or 911 and get the help that they need. So Let me throw that out and ask a question. How can we, the state funding, which was called GBRICS at the time, is intended to do that, is to try to sort of get the hospitals to foot some of the bill for paying for some of the services. That's where they got some of that 40 million. Marketing it, they've had a campaign to encourage people to do 988, but I haven't seen a campaign from the department that says, hey, folks, we've got good evidence we're doing a better job. That's the part that's missing. There is some evidence that we have that actually 911 calls, by the way, have decreased for mental health purposes, something on the order of 30 to 40% since they did a marketing effort for 988, and 988 went up double in the number of calls. So there is some effectiveness going on with people in the community trying to call the right service for their needs. But I haven't seen anything yet that the BPD has done that's able to move that needle and try to help people understand that, I mean, clearly we're trying to do that today, but I think that really what we need is something from BPD that will help with let people see it and realize that there really is a new department when it comes to how they interact with those that have disabilities. Any suggestions? Don't be bashful now. You have a suggestion, go for it, please. Oh, a question. Please, go ahead.
Get a little closer so we can hear you. There are a couple of things you have to think through. I mean, you don't want to hear this, I'm certain, but the first step is, you just can't clear a corner just because you don't like somebody staying in the street. I mean, the police can act if they have a legal basis to do it. You don't want police officers having the power to be able to just remove somebody just because they don't like that person or because they don't like the way that person looks or somebody complains. Now, if there is a crime, loitering is, if you report it correctly, the police can do something about it.
And again, let me if I could
Yeah,
jump in
yeah.
on that. Yeah, there is a program aimed at just that, okay? And it's run jointly by the police and by the mental health system. It's called LEAD. And they are designed to address just what you're talking about. And it's done in a way that, as Ken points out, that has to be constitutional. But individuals that have an addiction that are struggling with things, they can often be helped and be convinced to get that help. And that's what they've had success with this program. So I would say to you, call 988 and tell them that you are just exactly what you're facing, but emphasize the fact that you have people who are intoxicated, that are not being, that their behavior is such that they're being disruptive, that there is a risk of to public safety because things can, But I would focus on that, but I would call 988 first, from what you described, before I'd call the police. I'd be calling 988. 988 is the mobile crisis team that deals with substance abuse and mental health problems. So I would also focus on that. Yeah, but you just explain it to them so they'll understand it, and if you remember the word lead, that might be something you toss into it, where you say, I understand you'll have a lead program, can you get somebody to help out with it?
But for folks that are loitering and blocking access to your business, continue to call the police. Because what happens over time is those calls get logged, and in the police department's CompStat, they look at repeat addresses, repeat calls, and they start holding those commanders accountable to problem solve that. And some of it may just be where the officer really can't do anything about it. But just by having an officer there, a lot of folks that are loitering aren't going to want to talk to the officer, so they'll move on. And if that happens multiple times, they may find someplace else to congregate. But you should not, your business should not suffer by having folks loitering right at your front door. And,
You're not helpless, is what we're saying.
yeah,
Is what? Oh, tents. Oh. Someone in vehicles, you're talking about the tents on vehicles, oh, okay. Oh, well, they do. It violates a city ordinance
and a state law.
and state law, so we've seen, I mean, in our review of arrest cases, we've seen where police have pulled people over for having windows that are too dark.
I would go to your district headquarters and when they have those community meetings and talk to them about that.
Thank you.
Come on, guys, we got,
Everybody's now thinking about how dark is my? We're all examining that.
well, there are 3 minutes. Well, let's use it up. You look like, I'm gonna be like a law school professor and
Go
just
for it.
start asking questions.
I had her in mind too. I think you got the right person.
I know you have something you want to ask us.
How is it that the public's going to eventually realize that there is a change in the police department, particularly in my case, where the way they interact with people who have disabilities, drug abuse, mental health, those kind of issues, homelessness, that there is a change occurring? How is that going to work its way to where people have confidence in it? With your juvenile background, I would encourage you, there is a youth advisory group that we have, not we have, but the city has, the BPD has, and we've encouraged for the monitoring team. So I would encourage you to join up and help us out. All right. Now that you're retired.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and I want to thank all of you for attending. I assume, Wanda, we are now out of time, is that correct? Okay. Thank everybody for coming in. Love your questions. I was glad that I called on you. And we're around. I mean, we can be reached. Wanda, you may want to give the information. Okay, good.
Excellent.
So again, thank you so much for coming in. I hope this has been helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we can all, we can get 5.
Oh, yeah, well,
We'll put him in the front. Randy, you sitting up front. Poor Evan's getting.
Hey, listen, y'all keep embarrassing me like that. Put Evan in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, Evan, I know where he's going.